Once Upon a Christmas Time by Thyra Ferré Bjorn. Chapter 6. How vividly it comes to me now, as I dream back into the long ago, the feeling that came to us when we opened our eyes on the morning of the day before Christmas. Julafton in Swedish. The very word has a jubilant ring to it. It was Julafton all over Sweden, and you awoke to a spotless world, a truly happy world. In the days of long, long ago, on that special morning, the whole family would gather at the front door, which the head of the household would open wide. He would stand quietly for a moment, and then in a loud voice would call out into the beautiful, snow-covered wonderland, "Welcome, dear Christmas." This was the morning when the sheaf for the birds was set out. That tradition is still observed, and I predict that it will always be among the Swedish people. Each household in olden days tried to set its sheaf a little higher than its neighbors. It was believed that the family which could set its sheaf the highest would be the luckiest one in the approaching year. So the farmers used to get long poles and raise the sheaves up on them high in the air. In my time, however, it was placed outside the kitchen window, and there was no competition involved. It was there as a feast for the many birds that would come for their Christmas treat, but also so that we could have the pleasure of watching them. They were so beautiful, especially the domherrar, in their red vest and the black and white skata. The skata was a bird that stole things, and in the summer you had to be very careful not to leave any silver around. They very quickly picked up any spoon or fork and took it to their nest in the tall oak trees. They were very large birds and very clever. But in the winter, you accepted this sneaky thief with the rest, and it was fun to see them all so close by and to admire their beauty. There were many, many different kinds of birds. They came in flocks for their feast, and what a picture they made in that large yellow sheaf bursting with grain, against a background of snow-covered fir trees. What a twittering noise they made, and what a commotion as they celebrated their Christmas holiday. It wasn't just the birds that were taken care of on that day. All the farm animals were given a special treat. There were oats and lumps of sugar for the horses, and there was extra hay for the cows. The pigs got boiled potatoes and skim milk with their mush, and the chickens were given lots of the very best grain. Cats received a bowl of cream, and dogs a big bone with lots of meat on it. The children were usually given the pleasure of taking care of the Christmas feed for the animals, and each animal was wished God Jul, Merry Christmas. So Christmas cheer was spread everywhere on that blessed day. During the forenoon, as a rule, the Christmas tree which had been brought home the previous day was decorated. Each Swedish home had its own tradition as to who was given this honor, but in our parsonage, it was always Papa who did the decorating, and we children had no part in it. His Papa had always done it in their home, and his Papa before him, and in that same way, traditions were passed down and formed patterns in the different homes across the land. We children had to wait outside the door of the best room, where most of the Christmas festivities would take place. It was a long wait on a long day. The hours ticked away so slowly, and when we heard Papa's feet moving about, we could visualize the beauty that we would soon behold. Papa was very systematic, and we were sure that he had a ruler and measured the distance between each candle, making sure that the balancing apples hung at exactly the same angle. But presently the door would open, and there it would stand, the tree of trees, our very own selection in all its glory. And we were sure that ours was the most beautiful Julgran Christmas tree in all of Sweden. It was the busiest day of the year for the housewives, while the rest of the family had very little to do to take up their time. But the mother had to prepare the smorgasbord and all the other courses for the big feast, now only hours away. The house was clean. There had only been a little last-minute dusting to do that morning. Beds and dishes had been done quickly, and now the thing to which she gave all her time was fixing the food. The first chore, perhaps, was putting the rice porridge on the stove. It had to boil very, very slowly all day long in order to be just right. Every so often it was stirred, and a little more milk might be added to it. In the later hours, a large stick of whole cinnamon was placed in the white fluffy mixture, and of course the traditional whole almond. The almond was very important, because if you were a bachelor or a spinster, and if you got the almond in your porridge on Christmas Eve, it was absolutely certain that you would be married before Yulafton came again. The next thing to be put on the stove was the big kettle that left little room for other kettles. It contained the pig's head and feet, a piece of beef, and lots of sausages. All this would simmer slowly all morning until noon, when the dipping party took place. The dip in the pot, or in Swedish, doppa I gratan, was strictly a family affair, carried on in Swedish households for as long as anyone has a record. The tradition seems ageless, and it's very dear to people's hearts because it is a custom that is their very own, the one that sets them apart from all other countries. This is a kitchen celebration, and the table usually stands in the center of the room, covered with a snowy white linen cloth. The plates are in a pile with the silver forks beside them. There are drinking glasses on the table, one for each person, and there is a large pitcher of foaming Christmas ale and an enormous tray filled with homemade Christmas bread. The aroma which fills the kitchen suggests only one thing: Christmas. There is on the table a plate laden with chunks of sausage and slices of meat, but the rest of the things in the kettle are left there to continue simmering slowly for the evening meal. In many Swedish homes, stronger drinks appear at this time to help keep people happy during the long wait. But in our home, as in many hundreds of others, that was taboo. We were happy anyway, and needed no stimulant to make us so. And as the pale December sun set its rays through the shining window panes with their crisp white curtains, the father of the house picked up his plate, speared a chunk of limper bread on his fork, filled his glass with the beverage so it would be ready upon his return, and started the march toward the stove. The family followed according to age, and if there was a baby, the mother who came last in line would carry him so that all the family participated. The father stopped at the big kettle, dipped his bread into the broth, and then circled back to the table. He helped himself to meat from the platter, took his glass, and sat down wherever he chose to. The rest of the family followed his every move to the last detail. This meal was very special, and there was only one rule for all to observe: not to eat too much. There must be room for the food that would be served at dinner, for that was the biggest meal of all the year. But there was always a very festive feeling at day before Christmas, noontime, and family members were gay and gentle with each other. I don't remember there was ever a spanking or even a harsh word spoken. As I recall it, a little before the noon hour, all the stores closed and the activities in town stopped. Only skeleton forces remained in places which had to be attended. All minds were centered around just one thing: home and family. It seemed that for a time the world stood still, waiting for the great night which was drawing nearer and nearer. The day seemed to go on forever. There was no end in sight. But the mother, the only one rushing and running, perhaps wished the day had twice as many hours when there was so much to get ready. In the middle of the afternoon, the family gathered again in the kitchen. This was time for coffee and cookie tasting. Only a few kinds of cookies were set out, along with some of the fancy coffee bread. After all, it would not be fair to place too many temptations in front of an appetite which had to be saved. Each person helped himself, but with the same warning echoing again and again: don't eat too much. You just had to be hungry when you went to the table that night. It grew dark early. A little after 2 in the afternoon, the sun began to go down, and dusk settled over the countryside. At 3 o'clock, the lamps had to be lit. As evening approached, quick feet ran back and forth from the kitchen to the best room, and exciting odors tickled the nostrils. The table was set now, the big table, with all the leaves in it. It almost filled the whole room. Again there appeared a lovely white linen cloth and some green boughs from the spruce, tall candles on either side of the large friendly pig head, blushing there in the middle of everything with a large red apple in its mouth. Linen napkins, which had assumed the unique shape of a fan or flower, stood beside each plate. An artist had set the table. An artist who had done this year after year from the time she had married and moved into the house. Each year some little touch of her own was added to the beauty, but she was always very careful not to disrupt the pattern of the traditions which had come down from generations before her. With these she would never dare to tamper. Suddenly there came a strong, pungent odor from the kitchen. It was the Christmas fish, the lutefisk, cooking. This was a strange food belonging strictly to Christmas. It had been bought in the fall in long, dry sticks, which were put in a strong lime solution until they began to take on the right substance and again look like fish. About a week before Christmas, they were placed in a tub of clear, cold water, which was changed more and more often as the day drew nearer, until the fish was ready to be boiled. It was a fluffy, snow-white food, appetizing to the eye, but when it began to boil, sharply biting to the nose. Most of the time it had to be cooked in cheesecloth, or it would have boiled away into nothingness. But we did not mind the odor. To us Swedes, it meant Christmas Eve, and it was loved and welcomed. The fish was served with a thick, smooth white sauce, made with lots of butter and milk and a bit of heavy cream added to make it extra good and rich. Without the lutefisk, it would not be Christmas Eve in Sweden. Finally, the hour was upon us. It was time to take our places at the Christmas table, so beautifully arranged in every detail. Each dish was decorated in an unusual way, one outdoing the other. There it was, the traditional smorgasbord, in front of our very eyes. Sliced Christmas bread, flatbread, and hard bread, butter and fancy rolls decorated with curly green parsley, plain cheese, bondost, goat cheese, cumin cheese, pickled herring, salt raw herring with chives, sill and gaffelbieder, another herring, anchovies, herring salad, and Swedish sill salad, pickled beets, pickled Swedish cucumber, dill pickles, spare ribs with applesauce, pig's feet, jellied head cheese, rolled head cheese, stuffed eggs, small meatballs, sardines, asparagus omelet, lingonberries, fish pudding with melted butter, anchovies and smelt casserole, rolled fish fillets with lemon sauce, brown beans, and sausages, boiled, smoked, hot and cold, and Christmas ham. But before we began to eat, Papa opened the big family Bible, which had a special place on the table, and he read the old Christmas story. Then he bowed his head in thankfulness, as did Mama and all 8 children. Papa's prayer went out for the whole world, and then came the Amen. Our eyes almost popped out of our heads looking at so much goodness, and we could eat all we wanted. Since there were so many of us, this did not happen every day in our home, but on this night, we made up for it. We filled our plates to overflowing over and over. The second course was a lutefisk, which we ate with little boiled potatoes. The fish went down slowly, for it had to be boned before the sauce was put on it. It shook on our plates and needed lots of salt and coarse pepper to flavor it. The fork turned black just from touching it, and I wondered in later years what happened to the lining of our stomachs. But we Swedes are a hardy race, and I never knew of anyone whose health was affected by eating the fish. Then came the rice porridge, white and sweet, especially after we had put cinnamon and sugar on it and topped it with plenty of milk and cream. But before we could eat this tempting dish, each of us had to make up a rhyme. This was fun and added much laughter to the meal. There were many stories connected with this tradition of rhyming over the rice. There were times when it served as a reminder to someone who had made a promise and had failed to keep it. It must not sound mean, but still the person involved must get the hint that the promise was still remembered. And so the rhyme might go something like this. A coat was promised me last year. It must be mighty big, I fear, or else too small or wide to fit. A promise is so very cheap, it cost us only if we keep. So I ask again, where is it? Such rhymes were usually recited in families where the children were fairly grown up. In our family group, we resolved to say just a few lines with no particular reason or meaning, so long as they rhymed. This wonderful rice is delicious and sweet. The lady who cooked it just can't be beat. When the Christmas rice is eaten, be kind, or I will surely give you a piece of my mind. These rhymes went all around the table from the oldest to the youngest, and if one was too young, there was always help from the elders. Good, good rice, Mama so nice. It wasn't hard at all, and it surely produced gay conversation and laughter around our table. Then what fun we had with the almond. We had with us a guest that night, a lady who was still unmarried. We tried our best to see that the nut landed on her plate. Then our happiness knew no bounds, for we were sure that by the next Christmas she would be cooking her own rice for her own husband. After the rice porridge came cold, savory fruit soup, but by then we were so full that it was hard to eat more than a spoonful. We did our best, however, as this was also a very special dish, just filled with prunes and cherries and apples and pears and other fruits. But one could eat only so much. Even if the will was there, one's appetite had limits. We had to tell ourselves there would be other days and be content to let the meal end. Never were dishes cleared away so quickly. Mama put the food away while the rest of us helped to clean up. Soon the table was set again for coffee, which we would have a little later after the gifts. When all was ready, we entered the best room again to take our places and gaze at the lovely Christmas tree with its live white candles burning so lovely and still. Just at that moment, a message came for Papa. Someone in the parish was ill and needed him, and he had to leave as it was his obligation. A few minutes later, there came a firm knock on the front door, and Mama hurried to open it. Our hearts stood still for a breathless moment, and then we heard Mama say, Come in, Mr. Tomt." And then in he came, big and round as if he was padded. He bounced right in with the snow on his boots, but dressed in a very strange way. I could have sworn he wore Papa's red bathrobe, and the stocking hat with the long tassel was just like the one my little sister had. But we children never wondered out loud about such things. Anything could happen at Christmas. It was a time filled with mysteries one could not understand. And wasn't Christmas Eve itself a great miracle? Mama spoke kindly to the Tomt and asked him questions. "How far have you walked today, Mr. Tomt?" "Oh, I have walked hundreds and hundreds of miles, tramping all over the land to find good children." "Have you any good children in this house?" "Oh, yes, yes," said Mama. "All of our children. All 8 of them are very, very good." For a moment we had been a little frightened that Mama would remember moments when we had not been so good. But she had forgotten those times, and we were happy and relieved. The Tomt sat right down on the floor and crossed his legs. Then he took the sack from his back. He opened it wide. What do you think? He began to take out the very packages we had wrapped the night before. How in the world could they have gotten into his sack? Again, we didn't try to figure it out. We took what he gave us and made little piles of our gifts and one for our absent Papa, hoping he would be back in time while the Tomt was still there. But Papa did not come, and the Tomt was in a hurry, for he had many more stops to make. We followed him to the door, bowing and curtsying and saying thank you many, many times. We promised to be good so that he would come back again next year. It was fun to tell Papa all about it when he came home, only minutes later. He sat down and began to open his gifts, and we all hoped that next year he could be home when the miracle of the Yule Tomt happened. After we had coffee, it was right to bed for us, because the morrow was an important day too. and we had to leave for church very early in the morning. There would hardly be time to close our eyes before we would have to get up again. The minute we lay down, we fell fast asleep. What a day it had been. We were so grateful and so happy and felt so good and warm inside, knowing that we had had the best Christmas Eve in the whole world.